everyone, I am Professor TJ Wilkins, and this is a tutorial on how to trace the basic skirt patterns from the pattern draft. Let's trace out the patterns for the front and back skirt. To trace out the pattern for the front, start at the center front, the hem, the side seam, the waistline. We'll also trace the darts and the hip line. For the back skirt, start at the center back, the hem, the side seam, the waistline, the darts, and the hip. Place a piece of pattern paper over the front draft. Use the L square to trace the center front and the hem. Use the L square to trace from the hem at the side seam to about 1 inch above the hip line. Use the form curve to trace in the remainder of the side seam. Trace in the front waistline. Draw in the darts. Trace the hip. At center front, write place on fold. Label CF for center front. Remove the pattern paper. Tape pattern paper over the back draft. Use the L square to trace the center back and the hem. Use the L square to trace the side seam to about 1 inch above the hip line. Use the form curve to trace in the remainder of the side seam. Trace in the back waistline. Draw in the back darts. Draw in the hip line. Write CB at the center back. Remove the pattern. On the front skirt, we'll add 1/2 inch seam allowance at the waistline, 1/2 inch seam allowance at the side seam, and 1 inch seam allowance at the hem. Add 1/2 inch at the waistline. Place the 1/2 inch mark on the ruler on the waistline. Then draw in the seam allowance. Add 1/2 inch seam allowance at the waistline. Add 1 inch seam allowance at the hem. Extend the center front line. There will be no seam allowance added to the center front because the center front is placed on fold. Remove the tape from the pattern. This is what the pattern looks like so far. Let's drew the darts. Choose the leg that is closest to the center front, fold, and bring it over to the next leg. Tape down. Choose the leg on the next dart that's closest to the center front, fold on the leg, bring it over to the next leg, then tape down. Use the form curve to true the waistline. Then cut on the new waistline. Remove the tape. Open the pattern. Then cut out the remainder of the pattern. Label the hip line and basic skirt front. Cut 1 on fold. Add the date. On the back pattern, we'll add 1/2 inch at the waistline, 1/2 inch at the side seam, 1 inch at the hem, and 1 inch at the center back for the zipper. Align the 1/2 inch mark on the ruler with the waist seam line. Add 1/2 inch at the side seam. Add 1 inch at the hem. Add 1 inch at the center back. Remove the tape from the back pattern. Let's true the darts. Fold on the first dart leg. Then bring it over to the next dart leg. Tape down. On the second dart, choose the leg that is closest to center back and bring it over to the next leg. Fold on the leg that's closest to center back. Then bring it over to the next leg. Tape down. Use the French curve to true the waistline. Then cut on the new waistline. Remove the tape and open the pattern. Next, let's cut out the pattern. Cut on the side seam. Cut out the hem. And cut at the center back. Label the hip line. Call this the basic skirt. back, cut 2, and the date. We're pretty much done. Check to see if your side seams match up. Align at the hip line. Currently, the front is a little bit longer. The front is a little bit longer than the back. So I would rather add than take away. So I'm going to add about 1/4 of an inch more to the back at the side seam. I'm just going to tape in the amount that I need to add to this and then change the shape of the waistline. So I need to add 1/4 inch more. I'm adding the 1/4 inch at the side seam and then blending it into the waistline. Being that I added a little bit more to the seam allowance, I'm going to change the shape of the waistline. So this is my new waistline. And I can cut out the remainder. You can then erase off the old pattern lines. The pattern is pretty much done. I do want to add a few finishing touches to it. For example, I'm going to extend the hip line so that it could be used as a notch. And then I'm also going to extend the darts into the seam line and add notches at the center back. Okay, so let's just go ahead and do that right now. I'm going to extend. And then also extend the darts into the seam allowance. Let's go ahead and extend the hemline into the seam allowance as well. I'm also extending the back hip line into the seam allowance. I'm going to put 2 notches to indicate the center back. The notches are spaced about 1/4 inch apart. And extend the dart into the waist seam allowance. And we're done.